The caption slip reads, Rogers attempts suicide Harbor General Hospital. Filed March 30, 1958, by a photographer named Snow and a reporter named Osler on assignment for the Los Angeles Examiner. It survives today in the USC Library's archive. The subject, Ronald Charles Rogers, 21 years old. His wife had left him. His occupation, as the press recorded it, machinist. His address, Hawthorne, working-class Los Angeles, South End. The caption slip does not mention who his mother was. The newspaper did. That is how this became news. Ronald Charles Rogers was the adopted son of Mary Pickford, the most famous actress in the history of silent film. The first person in Hollywood history to earn $1 million a year. A woman whose face, at the height of her career, was seen by 12 million people every single day. America's sweetheart. The queen of the movies. A machinist in Hawthorne. Her son. 2 children. One of the most famous names in the world. And a story the official record has never fully told because almost no one thought to write it down. This is what the evidence shows. And this is what it cannot. Their names in the official adoption papers, Ronald Charles Rogers and Roxanne Rogers. Both carried the full public identity, Pickford Rogers, and were known as Ronald Charles Pickford Rogers and Roxanne Pickford Rogers. The Mary Pickford Foundation chronology places Ronald's adoption on May 2, 1943. Roxanne followed in 1944. Both dates are consistent across the Foundation's records, the PBS American Experience documentary, and Pickford's own 1948 essay in Guideposts magazine. Ronald Charles Rogers was born May 12, 1936. He was 6 years old when Mary Pickford and her husband, actor and bandleader Buddy Rogers, walked into a Los Angeles foundling home. According to the PBS account, Ronnie was dressed impeccably in a small suit. He had spent his first years in institutional care. Who his birth parents were, what those years had contained, that is not in the public record. It was never reported. It may never have been asked. Roxanne was born in 1942 and adopted as an infant. In the Guideposts essay, Pickford described first seeing her, a dark-haired girl with a bright countenance. More than I ever wanted anything in my life, Pickford wrote, I wanted that baby. She described racing to the orphanage the day the paperwork cleared, driving home in what she called a frenzy. Roxanne's origins before that drive are, likewise, gone from the accessible record. What both children entered, one of the most famous private residences in the world. Pickfair, the Beverly Hills estate Pickford had built with her second husband, Douglas Fairbanks, had hosted Albert Einstein, Amelia Earhart, the kings of Spain, and Siam, the Prince of Sweden. Foreign dignitaries who visited the White House routinely requested a second stop at Pickfair. It ran on a staff of 15 servants. Decades later, Ronnie told PBS what he remembered of arriving. It was so big, he said. You needed a road map to find the bathroom. I was in awe, but they told me I was going to be living there. That sentence exists. What he felt on the drive there, at 6 years old, watching the hills of Beverly Hills come into view, that is not available. It is the first of many silences. The fracture does not appear in a court filing or a public statement. It appears in an erasure. The PBS American Experience profile documents an early period of warmth, family photographs, press statements, the Guideposts essay in which Pickford wrote with apparent conviction about the joy of motherhood. Then the account notes, flatly, Pickford and Rogers stopped talking about them and their friends stopped asking. No date is attached to that disappearance. It corresponds roughly with Ronnie entering adolescence, the mid-1950s. What had been a photographed, publicized family became a private matter and then, quietly, a troubled one. In 1948, Pickford had written that no child had ever been more loved than Ronnie. What the PBS account records from the years that followed, she grew critical of both children's physical imperfections. Ronnie's small stature. Roxanne's crooked teeth. Multiple independent biographical sources apply the same language to the relationship. Tense. Turbulent. The consistency across sources suggests these characterizations derive from documented biographical interviews rather than editorial interpretation. Ronnie was sent to George Junior Republic, a boarding school in upstate New York. A former classmate named Edward Scalberg later submitted a memory to a film history forum. Ronnie was athletic, a good friend, he said. He asked Ronnie whether he ever wanted to be an actor. Ronnie said no. Then Scalberg added the phrase the official record has no category for. He was a good guy, he said. But unhappy. A single, unverifiable recollection. Not rigorous historical evidence, but one of the only surviving first-person accounts of what Ronnie Rogers's daily life actually contained during those years, and it stands alone, with nothing from the official archive to stand beside it. The most consolidated picture of life at Pickfair comes from the PBS American Experience documentary, which drew on Eileen Whitfield's 1997 biography Pickford, The Woman Who Made Hollywood, the most thorough scholarly account of Pickford's life, along with other biographical sources. That picture is consistent. Pickford and Rogers treated the children like theatrical props, sending them to boarding schools and posing them in family photographs when they were home on visits. The specific criticism of their appearances, Ronnie's stature, Roxanne's teeth, appears across multiple independent accounts, suggesting both children mentioned it separately in different contexts to different people. What is absent is harder to map. There are no surviving interviews with either child from their teenage years in any publicly accessible source. No boarding school records have been published. The account of Ronnie's growing coldness toward his mother, Roxanne's growing rebelliousness, these appear in the PBS account without citation to specific testimony, meaning they likely derive from biographical interviews conducted retrospectively, adults describing childhood events from memory. The record presents the conclusions but not always the chain of evidence beneath them. What Pickford's 1948 guidebooks essay records, in her own voice, a mother certain of her love. What the PBS account records from roughly 5 to 10 years later, a mother who had stopped speaking publicly about her children entirely. Between those two data points is where the childhood actually lived. That space, for both children, is largely empty in the written record. The most direct testimony either child gave to the historical record comes from Ronnie, in 2003. He was 67 years old. Mary Pickford had been dead for 24 years. He said, "I miss my mother. Things didn't work out that much. You know. But I'll never forget her. I think that she was a good woman." 4 sentences. No elaboration on record. No published follow-up. It is an extraordinary statement to sit with, because it does everything at once. It acknowledges failure without assigning blame. It expresses grief without demanding sympathy. It closes every door the interviewer might have opened. Whether that is grace or resignation or something for which there isn't a clean name, the record does not say. The PBS account records one other data point from the same period. When Ronnie attempted suicide in March 1958, Pickford visited him in the hospital. According to the documentary account, she complained that he had interrupted a well-needed rest she was taking. The original source of this detail is not specified in the PBS profile. It circulates across multiple derivative accounts, suggesting it derives from a consistent biographical origin. Its accuracy cannot be independently confirmed. Roxanne's adult testimony is thinner still. She appeared briefly in the PBS American Experience documentary. A film historian connected to the production noted, in a published account, that she appeared haggard before production makeup and described her as having had a very tough life. Both children, in separate accounts to separate sources, said their mother was too self-absorbed to provide genuine maternal love. This claim appears consistently across PBS, Wikipedia, and multiple biographical records, though the specific interviews from which it derives are not always identified. This is the frustration that working with this record produces, and it is worth naming directly. The children's voices exist closest to the events that shaped them, and those are the voices most thoroughly missing. What remains is their mother's voice, speaking warmly in 1948, and their adult voices, speaking carefully decades later. The childhood between those 2 points is inference and silence. That is not an archival accident. It is the consequence of who anyone thought was worth asking. Gladys Louise Smith was born April 8, 1892 in Toronto, Ontario, though she spent decades telling people she was born in 1893 to appear more of a prodigy and to hold access to the younger roles more plentiful in early theatre and film. Her father, John Charles Smith, was by most biographical accounts an alcoholic. The Mary Pickford Foundation chronology records that he left the family in late 1895. Records show him moving to a separate address in Toronto. He died February 11, 1898, of a cerebral hemorrhage following a workplace accident. Gladys was 5. She later wrote in her 1955 memoir Sunshine and Shadow, "I can close my eyes and still hear that scream of mothers at the moment father passed on." The house was in a district of Toronto then known as the Ward, a poor neighborhood where disease was common. Infectious quarantine had been placed on the household when Gladys was 4. Her mother Charlotte, left with 3 children and no income, took in boarders and worked as a seamstress. One of those boarders was a theatrical manager who suggested the children be given stage roles. On January 8, 1900, Gladys Smith, 7 years old, made her debut at Toronto's Princess Theatre. The role, a fatherless child in a melodrama called The Silver King. The record contains that detail without comment. By 1907, on the advice of theatrical producer David Belasco, Gladys Smith had become Mary Pickford, the name built from her middle name Marie and her maternal grandfather's surname. By 1909 she was working for D.W. Griffith at Biograph. By 1916 she was the first person in Hollywood history to earn $1 million per year, a contract she negotiated herself, at a time when women in the industry did not negotiate contracts. What biographers broadly agree on, the screen persona she constructed, the curly-haired child, innocent and fierce, playing orphans and waifs and fatherless girls through melodrama after melodrama, was not autobiography. It was architecture. The girl performing childhood had been supporting her family since before she could read. Biographers note this tension and interpret its consequences differently. What is documented? She built one of the most successful careers in entertainment history by performing a version of childhood she had never personally experienced. Whether that shaped how she related to actual children, her own children, is a question the evidence raises and does not resolve. Before she became a mother, Mary Pickford buried nearly everyone she had loved. Her first marriage, to actor Owen Moore in 1911, was marked by his alcoholism and documented episodes of domestic violence. Multiple biographical sources suggest she suffered a miscarriage or sought a termination during this marriage, and that this may have contributed to her later inability to conceive. These claims are consistently presented as unresolved, a contested biographical question, not an established fact. Her second marriage, to Douglas Fairbanks in 1920, became the most celebrated union in American popular culture. Pickfair was the social center of Hollywood at its most mythologized. The marriage lasted until Fairbanks began an affair with socialite Sylvia Ashley. Pickford filed for divorce in 1936. Then, in rapid succession, her mother Charlotte died of breast cancer in March 1928. Her brother Jack died in Paris on January 3, 1933. Alcohol had destroyed his nervous system. He was 36. Her sister Lottie died in 1936 of alcohol-related causes. Her first husband Owen Moore died in June 1939. Douglas Fairbanks died in December 1939. The New World Encyclopedia account records that upon hearing of Fairbanks's death, Pickford wept in front of Buddy Rogers and said, "My darling is gone." The original source of this quotation is not specified. It appears in multiple secondary accounts and likely derives from a single biographical origin. By the time she adopted Ronnie in May 1943, Pickford had buried her mother, both siblings, and the man she appears to have loved most, and her career in the medium that had made her was effectively over. She had retired from acting in 1933. The PBS American Experience states this without softening. After retiring from the screen, Pickford became an alcoholic, as her father had been. She was 51 years old when she brought Ronnie home. This is where the record places her at the moment she became a mother. If this documentary is giving you access to a story that official history glossed over, please subscribe and click the notification bell. Every episode in this series does the same work, the evidence shown honestly and the silences acknowledged without apology. The historical record on this family is richest in two places that have almost nothing in common. The first is Mary Pickford's professional biography, documented with exceptional thoroughness. More than 200 film appearances between 1909 and 1933. A co-founding role in United Artists in 1919, alongside Fairbanks, Chaplin, and Griffith. One of the 36 original founders of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. An Oscar for Coquette in 1930. A second honorary Oscar in 1976, accepted via a television crew sent to Pickfair, because she was by then too frail to leave the house. The Mary Pickford Foundation maintains a detailed chronology cross-referenced against legal filings, box office records, and contemporary press accounts. Her professional record is rich because her professional life was watched. The second rich seam is March 30, 1958. The Los Angeles Examiner caption slip survives in the USC Library's collection. The Getty Images Archive holds a photograph from that day, the ambulance transfer from Harbor General to St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica, its caption specifying Ronald Charles Rogers, 21 years old, adopted son of Mary Pickford. The reporter's name, the photographer's name, the date, both hospitals, the transfer, these are verifiable. The press documented the event because of his mother's name, and that coverage is now the best surviving record of one of the worst days in Ronnie Rogers's life. Multiple sources agree on what immediately preceded the crisis. His wife Lenore had recently left him. They had married young. He was working as a machinist in Hawthorne. His condition upon transfer was recorded as fair. His mother visited. What she said, and what it cost him to hear it, documented in one account, and verifiable from primary sources, and not easily forgotten by anyone who has encountered it. Roxanne's story is where the record fails most completely. She appears in a guidebook's essay as an infant rendered through her mother's emotions. She appears in 1970s press accounts as an adult working odd jobs and lacking money. She appears briefly in a PBS documentary about her mother. She appears in a blog comment from a woman whose grandmother worked alongside her at a diner, Roxanne's husband cooking in the back. That is close to the entirety of the documented account of Roxanne Pickford Rogers's adult life. One source, the Film Colony blog, which appears to have had contact with people connected to the PBS production, states that Roxanne died from osteoporosis in her early 50s. This cannot be confirmed. No obituary for Roxanne Rogers appears in publicly accessible databases. The date of her death is not established in any source reviewed here. The daughter she had, named Katina, appears once in the record by name only. The daughter of one of the most famous women in American film history died, at some point, without her death being widely recorded. That is its own kind of documentation. The estate figures are similarly incomplete. Pickford's will had been amended before her 1979 death, raising each child's bequest from $15,000 to $50,000. Ronnie stated publicly that the actual amounts received were significantly smaller. The estate documents, the precise figures, the legal process, any disputes, have not been made available in sources accessible to this investigation. And then there is the detail that appears in no other source. Find a grave records Ronald Charles Rogers as private first class, buried at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery in San Diego, January 16, 2010. Fort Rosecrans is a veterans cemetery. PFC is a military rank. Ronnie Rogers served in the United States military. Not one biographical source reviewed for this documentary, not the PBS account, not the Pickford Foundation chronology, not any secondary biography, mentions it. His service, whenever it occurred and wherever it took him, simply does not exist in the public narrative of his life. He was a veteran. The record did not notice the central interpretive question, whether Mary Pickford's failure as a mother was primarily a consequence of her alcoholism, her unresolved grief, her fundamental self-absorption, or some combination of all three, is one the evidence cannot fully resolve. Eileen Whitfield's 1997 biography Pickford, The Woman Who Made Hollywood, is the scholarly foundation for most subsequent accounts. Whitfield's approach, as reflected in sources that cite her, tends toward contextual complexity, situating Pickford's failures within the accumulated weight of loss. The PBS American experience draws on this framework while allowing the children's documented experiences to register with some independence from it. Where historians broadly agree, the relationship was troubled. Both children married young and left Pickfair. Both ended their lives without significant financial resources, despite Pickford's documented net worth of approximately $40 million at her death in 1979. Both, in separate accounts, described their mother as too self-absorbed to provide genuine maternal love. Where interpretation diverges, how much responsibility attaches specifically to Pickford, and how much to the conditions surrounding her, an alcoholic household, a name that functioned as weight rather than gift, two adults who appear to have wanted children more than they understood what children needed. Buddy Rogers is almost entirely absent from the documented account of what went wrong. Whether he was overwhelmed, deferential to Pickford in ways that cost the children something, or simply unaware of what was happening, the sources do not provide the material to say. That omission is worth noting plainly. He was their father too. One explanatory tendency surfaces in popular commentary, not in biographical scholarship, suggesting the children's difficulties were somehow predetermined by their origins, that the trouble was genetic rather than environmental. This claim has no support in developmental research or biographical analysis, and it functions primarily to redirect responsibility away from the household. It is mentioned here only because it circulates, and naming it is the most efficient way to set it aside. Ronnie Rogers married young. His wife's name was Lenore. The marriage ended when he was 21. March 30, 1958 is the date on the caption slip. After the hospitalization, the public record of Ronnie's life goes quiet, not the silence of someone who withdrew from fame, but the silence of someone the world had stopped watching. He had been the son of Mary Pickford in 1958. By the early 1960s he was simply a man. The Film Colony blog, which appears to have received information from one of Ronnie's own sons, states that he became involved in drug running for a motorcycle gang, served time in a federal prison, and died estranged from his own children. These claims, the gang, the federal prison, the estrangement, appear only in this secondary source and cannot be confirmed through publicly accessible records. They are included because the source appears to have family proximity, and because omitting them would present a falsely clean picture. What is verified? PFC Ronald Charles Rogers, buried at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery, San Diego. January 16, 2010. 73 years old. In 2003, 7 years before his death, he gave the interview. "I miss my mother. Things didn't work out that much, you know, but I'll never forget her. I think that she was a good woman." He said this at 67. About a childhood the record shows was something other than good. Whether it reflects grace, or a particular loyalty some children extend regardless of what they were given, or simply a man who had decided not to say anything further, that is not in the record. Roxanne's documented adult life is thinner still. She married. Pickford disapproved of her husband. She had a daughter named Katina. She was cut off financially at some point after leaving Pickfair. The specific circumstances are not accessible in any source reviewed here. She worked at a diner. She appeared briefly in a documentary about her mother. She died. The date is unclear. The cause is recorded in one secondary source only. No obituary has been located. The record of Roxanne Rogers' life ends in a discrepancy and an absence, and the absence is, in its way, the most accurate thing the record contains about her. Pickford's amended will had raised each child's bequest to $50,000. Ronnie stated publicly the amounts actually received were significantly smaller. The legal record of the estate settlement has not been made available. Both children shared the same basic architecture across their adult lives: early marriages, financial precarity, distance from Pickfair, and the long shadow of a name that carried enormous weight for everyone except the people who bore it forward into ordinary life. In 2003, Ronnie said he missed her. That is the last documented thing he said about any of it. The record cannot tell us what Ronnie Rogers' years in the foundling home were like, the years before the well-dressed 6-year-old caught the attention of two famous strangers and was brought to Pickfair. It cannot tell us whether either child understood why they were sent to boarding school, whether they believed it was something they had done, something they were, or simply something that happened to children in households like theirs. Whether the distance felt personal or structural, and whether, from the inside, there was any way to know the difference. It cannot tell us what Roxanne said to her daughter Katina about growing up at Pickfair, whether she told the story at all, whether she protected Katina from it, or passed it forward the way certain things get passed forward, without a name, as a shape in how you move through the world. It cannot tell us what happened to Pickford's desire to be a mother. The guidepost's essay reads as genuine: the racing to the orphanage, the frenzy of the drive home, the sentence about wanting Roxanne more than anything she had ever wanted. The PBS account documents what followed: the criticism, the boarding schools, the silence, the hospital visit, and what she reportedly said there. The record presents the desire and the failure side by side and offers nothing between them to show how one became the other. This is worth holding carefully. Those two things may not be in contradiction. People can want something deeply and still be incapable of providing it. Pickford's alcoholism is documented. Her losses are documented. Her reclusiveness is documented. These are facts, not exonerations. What they explain, whether they explain anything at all, is a question about human causation that evidence cannot answer. Evidence records what happened. It does not show who a person could not manage to be. The record cannot tell us what Ronnie thought on January 15, 2010, the day before he died in San Diego, as a private first class, in a veteran's cemetery. Whether he thought about the foundling home, about the road map to find the bathroom, about the family photographs taken when he came home from school on visits. Whether the sentence he said in 2003, "I think that she was a good woman," still felt true at the end, or whether it had become something he had said so long ago it no longer required feeling. What the record shows: a woman who became the most powerful actress in American silent film. Two children who entered her household with nothing and left it with very little. A biographical archive that preserved nearly everything about the mother and almost nothing about the children, not because they were unimportant, but because no one was looking. The mother was famous. The children were not. The record follows fame. It does not follow people once they step outside the frame. What the silences in this family's story actually are: the shape of lives that existed where no one with a notebook was standing. And what those lives contained, what it felt like to be those two children in that house, with that name, carrying all of it forward into a world that offered no guidance and eventually very little money and no map at all, that belongs to the silence now. The record reached its limit long before the lives did. Ronnie Rogers is buried at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery. The record gives us the date and the rank. It does not say who was there.